Just a small town girl living in a lonely world. And then, Tony come into, just a city boy, born and raised in South Jersey, which he's not from. Um,
This is a spoiler-heavy conversation that Mike and I are about to have, and we are going to be ruining everything about The Sopranos. So if you haven't watched it, you might want to turn this video off now. And if you try to skip to the end to get my final thoughts, nothing that I say is going to make any sense. You'll really need to watch this one from beginning to end so that you can understand not just my theory on that last scene, but everything that leads up to it and how it's all important. And now back to our video.
So welcome back to episode 2 of Tony and Mike Watch the World Burn. In this episode, we will be discussing The Sopranos. More specifically, the end of The Sopranos. Also, we talk about other shows and how they shit the bed in the last either show or the finale or the season. I'll be going over the basis of the show. We'll touch upon the cast. We'll go over some crazy internet theories that are out there.
And then we'll talk about my crazy theory.
Absolutely. To start off, we'll talk about things or shows out there that kind of shit the bed in the final season of the season finale. I have a couple picks. Did you have a couple picks that you had, Tony?
Lost is the one that immediately comes to mind. A lot of people think The Sopranos, obviously. Actually, there are so few shows that have had a really satisfying ending. Game of Thrones completely missed the mark. I have never seen a fan base turn against a show so fast ever. It's kind of amazing, and that's kind of what inspired this episode and this, because you watch Game of Thrones and George R.R. Martin, he's behind on his books. They were going from the source material, and then they had to wing it on their own when they were writing the last several episodes. And a lot of people think that that was actually the problem with it. And I'm going to say that you're probably half right. It probably was more in line with the vision of D&D than it was with George R.R. Martin's. Mm-hmm. And that's what got me thinking about The Sopranos, was that it was such a carefully crafted show. It was one of those rare shows that stuff that happened that you thought was completely irrelevant in the first or second episode of the season would come back in the 10th episode of the season, and you'd be like, oh, well, now I get it. It totally makes sense. And that's kind of what Game of Thrones was missing, that through line, that we're going to show you all this stuff, and then we're going to tie it all together for you at the end. I can only really think of 3 shows that have ended perfectly off the top of my head. The Next Generation, All Good Things, was a perfect ending to that. Babylon 5 had a absolute perfect ending to it. And the weird thing about it is that the ending of the show came at the end of the 4th season, and then they got a 5th season, and then they had to figure out what to do from there. So I consider the ending of Babylon 5 to be the last episode of season 4. And then The Wire. The Wire has the single most perfect ending of any TV show that I can think of. Battlestar Galactica had another shit the bed ending. Everybody was so waiting for the mystery to be solved, and they're like, no, we're going to show you the characters. And it's like, we've been glued to this for 5 years. I mean, don't get me wrong, we love the characters, but it's the mystery of who's the missing Cylons. And they completely just they wussed out. They didn't want to go through with the ending that everybody wanted, or what viewers were wanting from it. I don't know what the point of that one was, to be honest. Can you think of any shows that completely bombed on their last episode?
On the last episode, not so much, but more or less like on the last season. Game of Thrones, like you said, was my first pick. Mm-hmm. Of course, the last 2 seasons, and I agree with you to a degree. I think they didn't have any source material to really work off of, so I think that kind of limited their writing ability. Not having something really good to take from. I think that's probably about 75%. I think the other 25% is the fact that the producers were ready to move on. Like, I think they were just tired of the show. I think they even said point blank that they were tired of doing that show. So they're like, rushing out and just trying to get out as fast as possible so they could do
they were also
or something like that.
This movie. They were signed on to do a Star Wars movie for Disney, Star Wars trilogy, and the show ended so poorly that they blew that deal. So, how'd that work out for them?
Yeah, don't half-ass it, people. Do it right.
Strong finish.
Another show that I used to love when I was a kid, or younger, I should say, was that 70s show. Love that show. Great show. Yeah. And then in the last season, I should say a lot, but two of the big characters left. Eric Foreman, who was the basis of the show, left. And then Kelso left that show. So there's a big gap. And so they tried filling in Topher Grace's character, Eric Foreman, his character with another character who was supposed to be like a relative of Eric's. And then he was supposed to be then Donna's love interest. Well, I'm sorry, but after like 7 or 8 seasons of Eric as Donna's love interest, you're not going to convince anybody in one season that this is the new love interest. It just isn't going to happen. People aren't going to buy it.
They did a Dukes of Hazzard. They did a Dukes of Hazzard when John Schneider and Tom Wopat left, and they brought in the cousins. And
that's right. Yes, I remember that. Yes. Same exact thing. Yes, perfect. That shit don't work.
To our friends in television production, it never works. Just know when to say when. You want to give it some closure, that's great. But back to shows that ended well. MASH ended well. It had a really, really phenomenal ending, which is odd considering how episodic that the show was, but they had this perfectly appropriate ending. But I also understand that Westworld season 3 completely crapped the bed. So
that was my last pick.
Okay, keep going. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there, but
no. But the first season of that show was flipping awesome. It was fucking awesome. It had everything you could possibly want. Great mysteries, great characters, great acting. I mean, you had Anthony Hopkins, just phenomenal in it. Actually, every actor in that show was really great. And then the second season rolled along, and just completely shit the bed.
It's J.J. Abrams.
They took the Dolores character, who was such a good character in the first season. That's who you pretty much followed through most of it. She was the central part of it. And then there was a couple other characters too, but she was the main focus. You had such empathy for her. And spoilers, at the end of the first season, where she shoots Anthony Hopkins in the back of the head, whose character's name was Ford, shot Ford in the back of the head, and that's how the season ended. And it was so brilliant. And they took this great, compassionate character that she totally had empathy for. And then in the second season, it's like a total 180. She becomes the villain. And it's not like a gradual take to the villain. It's like hammer down, fucking, we're going for it. And it just didn't translate. Like you didn't feel that same thing for that character anymore. You couldn't get behind her or root for her.
They did an Anakin Skywalker. Just suddenly,
I guess you could say that.
I'm evil now, and I'm gonna go kill Ben Kenobi.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
And now you know why I don't bother watching anything that's produced by Bad Robot, because they always do these really strong first acts or first seasons, and then it's like they get tired of messing with it. They can't be bothered to pay attention to their own continuity. Take a look at the Star Trek films. Take a look at Lost. Take a look at everything that they have produced of note. It always winds up being a mess. They don't resolve anything to any sort of satisfactory level. And so because of that, it's just, I've been burned too many times by Bad Robot that I will not give anything that they produce at this point a chance. It always ends up like, you'll start really digging at the first, 1/3 of it, but the minute the second third starts and you start to see the chinks in the armor, and by the time they actually get to the end, it's just become this colossal junk pile that they're just throwing stuff at the screen to see what sticks. And worse than that, and I've noticed this with every J.J. Abrams production, and Bad Robot in particular, is that they confuse a lot of stuff happening with moving the plot forward. There's so many action sequences that have nothing to do with anything, but, oh, they're exciting. It's like, action scenes are like a joke. They're interesting the first time. And then the more you see it, the more you're just kind of like, yeah. Can we move on? And that's exactly the problem with Bad Robot productions in general, is that they confuse something happening with something being a plot point or something that's important that a viewer is going to watch. They have absolutely no regard for rewatchability and coherence when it comes to anything that they've done.
And I think that's an issue in general with just any tentpole movie nowadays. It's all about, how many action scenes we can throw out there, how pretty we can make it, and it's all style, no substance.
I mean,
with a few exceptions here and there, but in general, yeah, I think that's the big issue.
Craft is important, and knowing how to end something is important, and knowing how to make everything that you're showing from the beginning to the end relevant or at least interesting is important. And it's a lot of big budget movies nowadays. It's kind of like watching those schlocky 70s and 80s films where you could tell that they were just filming this super long fight scene just to pad out the runtime. They were just trying to get to 90 minutes back then so that they could be considered a feature. And now it's just become a part of the program. And it's kind of disheartening. There is this huge quality gap now. It used to be that a lot of tentpole films, like you take a look at E.T. and The Empire Strikes Back and all these tentpole films from the 80s, big studio films from the 80s, and they hold up because everything that's happening is has consequence. It's forwarding the plot. It's informing you on the characters. And now it's just like, well, we got to have some shit blow up because people like it when stuff blows up. And they've confused the point of having an action sequence. It's why the first Die Hard movie is a masterpiece, and everything after that is just, it's there. Yeah. Same with Predator. Yeah. Every action scene in there informs you on the characters. It informs you on the team, on the hierarchy, on who they are and what their motivations are. And even though they're very visceral and very in your face, big booms, big gun shoots, big guns going off and lots of bullets and lots of blood and throwing machetes and one-liners and all that. It's all there. It has every trope from every horror film ever, or every action film ever made. And yet at the same time, not a single one of them is wasted. And I don't feel like it's just there for the sake of being there.
Anything else we need to say about stuff that shit the bed?
I really think that covers it.
Moving on. So let's get into the basics of the show. The Sopranos ran for 6 seasons from 1999 to 2007. Each season contained 13 episodes, except the 6th season, which, correct me if I'm wrong, was 21 episodes?
I think it was 21, yeah.
Okay. The show was created by David Chase. Actually, the show itself was originally conceived as a movie. I couldn't find a lot of details on it. There wasn't much out there, but possible castings included Robert De Niro, of course. And Annette Bening was thought of as Tony Soprano's mother. That would have been pretty interesting to see, a movie. I'm glad we got the show instead.
Annette Bening? Really?
Yeah.
Annette Bening was hot in 99. That would have been like Oedipus.
Well, I don't know. So. I don't know the time frame of when this movie was going to happen. Like I said, there wasn't a lot of details. It was just originally conceived as a movie. So I don't know, if it was like 85, 86 or whenever, but you're still right. She still would have been hot.
I mean, Carmela Soprano, to his wife, sure, but his mother, I'm not. I don't know that I'm buying that one. I think someone might have. So I think someone looks at Annette Bening now and thinks, oh, she must have been the mother, and doesn't realize that Annette Bening in The Grifters was quite possibly one of the hottest women in cinema I've ever seen, ever. So
that's probably debatable, but we'll debate that another time. So then, going back to the mother, she was actually the basis of the show. David Chase's mother was actually the kind of basis for that, at least the beginnings of the series. And then, also for me, and probably for you as well, really the show is really about the psychiatry of Tony Soprano, like the goings on in his mind, the goings on of a gangster, a husband, a father, a son, a nephew, and an uncle, slash pseudo brother to, Christopher Moltisanti. Anything you'd like to add into that?
The show's always been very thematically heavy. There's always been a lot of through lines as far as, different characters represent different things throughout the entire production. I don't want to go too deep into that because we could sit here for the next 2 hours and just talk about the series as a whole. Yeah. But it was always very grounded. And it was also intended, I think, from its construction early on, to be a realistic depiction of mobsters. It was not intended to be like Goodfellas for the small screen. Quite the contrary. It's very matter of fact. It's the methods that they use to take over somebody's business who's in gambling debt and then basically drive them into debt while they're pocketing all the money and selling off their merchandise and pocketing all the profit from all of that. Also the scams that they have with the unions and, no-show job contracts and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of, bits and pieces that are intended to be like, yeah, this is really what gangsters are like. And while that's fascinating, it's nowhere near as shiny or cool as Joe Pesci and Ray Liotta and Robert De Niro in Goodfellas, where they're young and they're cool and they've got their super sweet sports cars and they're smoking and drinking at the tiki club every night and playing cards until 4 a.m. It's a very raw kind of look. It's a very warts and all sort of look at what mob life is probably really like. And the other thing I thought was kind of fascinating was how a lot of the gangsters in the show really seemed to be broke until they hit that upper echelon. They were always crying poor about one thing or another. And I'm thinking, didn't you just pocket like several thousands of dollars, big score, this, that? It never seemed to matter. It was always almost an addiction for them to get more as the show progressed. But I think those are like the big things about the construction of The Sopranos and what the show was kind of about from beginning to the end. So
yeah, I would definitely say in Sopranos, the gangster life was a job.
Very much so.
Kind of a lifestyle, but not in the way that's, like you said, is portrayed in Goodfellas. Because Goodfellas, coming from Henry Hill's perspective, was a very glamorous thing, and he idolized that lifestyle. So to him, it was a lifestyle. Where Sopranos, it was a job. It's just what they did to make money, provide food for their family, take care of their families. And that's exactly what Tony Soprano said multiple times. Is what I have to do to provide for you guys. It's not this glamorous lifestyle. It's what I have to do because it's the only thing I know how to do.
Exactly. And that's a good point. That's well said. So.
All right. So let's get into the cast. The cast is stupid big, but I'm not going to hit every character that was in the show because it was just massive. But here's the core group. James Gandolfini as Tony Soprano, Edie Falco as Carmela Soprano, the wife, Jamie Lynn Sigler as Meadow Soprano, the daughter, Ada Turturro as Janice Soprano, Tony's sister, Robert Eller as AJ Soprano, Tony's son, Dominic, I hope I pronounced this right, Chinisi, probably wrong, as Junior Soprano, Tony Soprano's uncle, Michael Imperioli as Christopher Moltisanti, who was Tony's nephew, but was kind of like a pseudo brother to Tony. And
I would say pseudo son. I wouldn't say brother so much as son, because he was always the low man on the totem pole. He was always, as a matter of fact, one of the big arcs throughout the series was Christopher Moltisanti coming up from being a driver all the way up to him being one of the captains in the crew, in the Soprano family. So, I think it's more about his evolution of the character. I don't know that I would ever refer to him as a brother. It was always more of a father-son sort of relationship, because it's kind of obvious that the plan was for Tony to leave the Soprano crew to Christopher Moltisanti. He was blood all the way up until Bobby came along.
Yeah.
So
Fair enough. Fair enough. Uh, Drea Di Matteo as Adriana, who was Christopher's girlfriend. Tony Chirico as Paulie. Steven Van Zandt as Silvio. Steve Sharippa as Bobby. And last and certainly not least, Lorraine Bracco as the excellent Dr. Jennifer Milfy, who was definitely a MILF, and was also in Goodfellas.
absolutely, yeah, she was Karen in Goodfellas.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, something that I had read about online was that she had originally read, and they offered her the role of Carmela Soprano. So
really?
she was originally, they intended to make her Tony Soprano's wife, and she, after they're like, well, what do you want to do? She said, I think I'd prefer to play the doctor role. I think it's something I haven't done. So kudos to her for getting it, because she very much would have wound up being Karen Hill again if she had taken that role. And I actually think Edie Falco did a wonderful job at playing the wife who knew who her husband was, who knew what he did, and absolutely never allowed it to invade her home. And that's a real difficult role to carry. But then add the baggage that, oh yeah, by the way, you were Karen Hill in the last big role that anyone remembers you in, and I think that almost makes it impossible. So it was a smart move on her choice to play Dr. Melfi, because it was completely against her. So,
all right. So starting into theories, before we get into your theory, I just kind of like a quick little dig.
I'm sorry, you mean the correct answer? That was what you were looking for there. So
that is for our audience to decide.
No, it's not.
So, anyways, just kind of touch on some crazy theories or some different theories about this show.
Wrong theories.
Huh? Well, some have nothing to do with the ending of the show whatsoever. Some are just oddball things. For example, that the Sopranos were cannibals and that they served them up on the menu at Satriali's. Never heard this one before. I never heard anybody even mention this.
There was a time in one of the earlier seasons where there was a body that needed to be disposed of, and they did take it to the meat market, to the deli, and they did grind the body up. And I think Chris Montalsante made a crack about, remind me not to eat here for a while. He's part of the family. If they're cannibals, wouldn't he be all like, I'm getting some pork steaks this weekend? So, wrong. So.
And exactly, that doesn't make them cannibals. That just makes them a convenient way of disposing of the body.
Exactly.
Although they did eat there quite a bit. The next interesting theory, which has nothing to do with the end of the show, was Janice was part of the Wild Wild Country cult. And that she escaped that cult, and that's when she came back from the West.
I don't know that she escaped. I don't know that I would call it a cult, what she was involved in. I think she just went to the West Coast and got really hippy dippy, because she was all about being a groupie and a musician's girlfriend. And if you're going to be a musician's girlfriend, you go to where the musicians are, the West Coast. Because later she's dating the guy that's the contemporary Christian musician, and he has narcolepsy, and he's literally, and they're trying to put their music together and record their own album and all that, because she's thinking that contemporary Christian is something that they can break into. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not buying that one. There's too much character for Janice, number one, and number two, it's really obvious that Janice showed up exactly like Tony Soprano thought, to try to take advantage of their mother, because they spent several episodes of Janice digging up the backyard and going through the basement and trying to find the stash of money that she assumed her father or her mother had stashed somewhere in that house. So I'm sorry, that's not the actions of a cultist. That is the actions of a greedy, self-absorbed narcissist that wants what she wants, and she's upset that she can't get into the family because she's a woman, and that's a no-no. So, wrong. Next theory. So,
I'm sorry, give me a second. So, the next one kind of aligns with one of your theories, that the orange cat is somebody's ghost, but in this case, they say it's Adriana's ghost.
No. Next theory. We will get into that. Next theory.
The next one. So this does go to the actual topic, the actual end of the show, and more specifically the last scene. Well, this one not quite as much just yet, but that Tony is already dead, but he died in the 5th season episode, The Test Stream.
No. I'm not familiar with this one. Give me a little bit of meat on the bone so I have something to chew on here.
Like I said, it was a shallow grave when I dug up some of this stuff, so I don't have a whole lot of information for you. But I will link to the articles for everybody else to check out later.
The season was when, Uncle June shoots Tony in the first episode of season 6. Mm-hmm. Why bother with that if he's already dead?
Doesn't make any sense to me either.
And number 2, Adriana was killed by Tony and crew at the end of episode 5. So again, why bother with, if Tony Soprano is supposed to already be dead, why have all these major happenings occur? Why bother with Phil becoming the New York boss, or John getting arrested and going to jail and the fear of the indictments? If that's I'm sorry, there's too much stuff that kind of coalesced from everything that had happened in previous seasons. I don't buy it. It's an interesting idea, I guess, but wrong.
Okay, and this is probably this is the stupidest one I've seen. I laughed out loud when I heard it. The jukebox was just unplugged. That's why I cut the black.
The jukebox, really?
The jukebox was unplugged or tripped over.
If that's true, then explain to me why we. So they're saying that's the reason for the smash to black and the immediate silence after that?
That's what they're saying.
The jukebox was unplugged. Who unplugged it?
Some random whatever, I guess. I don't know, dude. As I said, it's the stupidest one I saw out there, so I had to include it.
Okay. I thought the cannibal one was you reaching, but holy shit, you have just taken it to a new level. Wow. I got nothing for you on that one. I don't even know how to feel about that one. That's like, really? This carefully constructed 6-year saga of the Soprano family and people rising and falling, and you feel that the last episode was about a jukebox losing power. I think it's because Steve Perry didn't want to perform live anymore with Neil Sean. I'm going with that one. I mean, it makes just as much sense. That was when Tony Soprano found out the news that Journey had broken up. He wasn't paying attention. Raised on the Radio was still one of his favorite albums. That makes every bit as much sense as that jukebox theory. That's what I got for you on that one.
I don't know. But we did get, Neil Sean and Jan Hammer through that. We did. So Jan Hammer's all his guitar balding drumming glory.
And it's magnificent. And I found out what Jan Hammer was actually famous for. Just segue for just a moment. He's the guy that wrote the Miami Vice theme.
Really?
Yes, that's who Jan Hammer is. Now you know why Neil Sean was like, I'd like to do some riffs. Apparently he did a lot of soundtracks. He did a lot of the Miami Vice music. He did like Crockett's theme and several other big pieces of music that were reused over and over on the show. So that's Jan Hammer's claim to fame. And now we know that Neil Sean is a Miami Vice fan.
Yeah. He was a talented guy. He just was not made for the MTV generation.
You know what? if the fro don't flow, it needs to go. That's what I got for you on that one.
All right. So now let's go to your debate and your takes and thoughts on this.
Hang on one sec. Oh, thank you. Look at this. Look at this. Oh, wait, we're not getting paid for that. My son brought me a coffee.
Look right there.
You know what? The pilot of one of the Battlestar Galactica Vipers, if you'd like to, sponsor our show, I'll turn this cup around. So anyway, am I ready for my deep dive?
Do it.
All right. Like I said, I went into this knowing that it's a well-constructed show, that everything about it was thought out, that there's no detail that's in any of the scenes, any of the shots that doesn't become important later on. It's always the case. And another one of those big clues was that stuff that happens in the first and second and third episodes come back in the last episodes of almost every season of the show. There's a lot of examples. I'll let you guys go dig through that. Otherwise, we're going to spend the next hour talking about that crap. But season 6, Tony gets shot. And he collapses when he gets to the phone. And the next 2 episodes of the show, Tony is in a coma. And he has this very vivid dream going on where he's a salesman and he doesn't have his identity and he can't go to a hotel because he's got someone else's wallet, and there's all this weirdness going on. That whole sequence, everything about that, is a primer for decoding what happens later in the season. And we've had several instances of Tony Soprano's dreams. We had his coach dream that he always has after AJ and his friends busted up the school and trashed the trophy thing. There are multiple instances of Tony having a dream that's relevant. That's how he figured out Pussy Bumpin' Sorrow had actually turned state's evidence. He had a dream and he was talking to a fish. And it was Pussy's voice, and it said, I'm an informant, right? All of this is relevant. And this is all the stuff that, comes back later on. So here it is. Here's where I jump out of the submarine and start swimming for the surface.
Okay.
The car accident. Tony and Chris Montesani go and they talk to Phil, the new boss of the New York crime family, and they're talking about dumping asbestos. And on their way back, they get in this horrible car accident. It is absolutely catastrophic. That car literally rolls over end for a good 30 seconds. This is not a small car accident by any stretch. That was the last scene of Tony Soprano actually being alive. That right there started it. The car accident happens. Chris tells him he's on drugs. Chris gets out. Tony, he confesses that he'll never pass a drug test, that he's actually high right then and there. Tony Soprano smothers him, and he has literal blood on his hands after he does that. They specifically have a shot in there where they show Tony Soprano looking at his hands. He sits down on the ground. He calls the number. He calls 911. And next thing you know, it immediately jump cuts. And this is, I think, when we've exited reality. Because the first shot is a point of view shot, and it's Tony Soprano looking out at his feet at the hospital and when the ambulance has arrived. I don't know that we've ever actually seen a point of view shot in the show. And so I think that's the director's way of saying, okay, everything you see from this point forward is literally going to be Tony Soprano's point of view. You are no longer seeing this objectively. You are not an outside observer. You are seeing what Tony is seeing. Everything past that is Tony being in a coma, because it starts off weird. The first thing that we get is Tony wakes up and we brought you in with your friend and he's dead. It's so very matter of fact. It's something that would never happen in a hospital. And then they wheel him out into the hallway, and while he's wheeled out and sitting in the hallway, he can look down the hall and there's the body bag with Chris Montalsante's body in it, like literally right in Tony's field of view.
It wouldn't be there anyway, being in the morgue.
With blood on it. Duet.
It'd be in the morgue.
Exactly.
He's
It would
dead.
be more. It would not. It most definitely would not be down
in
the
the hospital.
hallway from where Tony Soprano is sitting. You know, he calls Carmela and we've seen Carmela deal with a ton of bad news. And she has this very big, oh my God moment. She's like screaming and freaking out. It's like Carmela has never done that ever prior to this. And again, this is, I think, how Tony would like Carmela to react.
Mm-hmm.
So from this point forward, we have a bunch of recurring themes. And you know, I don't want to go through what happens point by point. I'm just going to say that the recurring themes are important. This is the stuff that's stuck in Tony Soprano's head. And the recurring themes are the departed or departures. And there's a couple examples of that. The soundtrack that they're listening to, the CD that Chris Montesante puts in the CD player right before the car accident, is the Departed soundtrack. And they turn on Comfortably Numb from there. And then immediately following that, we have two funerals. Oh, well, what do we call a funeral? Oh, that's right. It's a send-off. Two more departures. When Tony goes and meets with Dr. Melfi and he rips the recipe out of the magazine for the ribeye steaks, the actual name of the magazine is Departures. So it's one of those themes that it comes up over and over again, so much so that it's like it's very obvious that that was stuck in Tony's head right before the accident, because that was one of the last things him and Chris Montesante talked about. So in his unconscious, I'm in a coma state, that's right there. Another one of the big themes that keeps popping up is asbestos. The last thing that he was talking to Phil Leotardo about was dumping the asbestos. And now, weirdly, we have all these scenes where there's white flakes falling down. It's very snow. They literally talk about the asbestos deal over and over again. They show it being dumped in a lake. They show, but even more under, you know, more not in your face than that. In the later episodes, they're in a van, and on that van, it's called Steinholtz Beverage. Fun fact, Steinholtz is actually a heat-absorbing material made from crushed rock. Well, what does that sound like? Oh, asbestos?
Like asbestos.
And while they're in that van at the beginning of that last episode.
Sorry to interrupt you, but that's fucking creative as fuck.
It is. It is.
I mean, that's a whole level of creativity. I never in a million years would have picked that up. Ever.
Absolutely. And you know, it's just one of those, like, every time that you see snowflakes falling, every time that you see a reference to that job, every time that you see asbestos being dumped, all of this is in Tony Soprano's head. This is not what's really happening. This is Tony Soprano thinking about, you know, well, I wonder what happened with that asbestos thing. He's resolving that issue in his own mind. But it's just the fact that it keeps popping up over and over and over again that makes it obvious that this isn't reality. That, you know, and most people just think Steinholtz, oh, it's a family name. No, not really. But it sounds like one. So kudos to them.
Exactly what I thought.
Another theme that pops up over and over again is motherhood. We obviously have Carmela Soprano, mother of Tony's kids. That's, you know, there's no work involved in that one. But Chris Montesante's now widowed wife, Tony comes out of his bedroom and they're down in the living room and she's breastfeeding a child. And it's very much a reference to earlier when Tony Soprano had a dream about mother. He'd just seen The Italian Woman when he'd gone over there and made a business dealing with them. And he had a very similar dream of a beautiful Italian woman breastfeeding a child. And that's kind of his ideal of what motherhood's supposed to be.
And those are the only two times ever that there's a baby breastfed in that show ever.
Yes. and also notice that, you know, her hair is down. It's not in a ponytail. It's all very done. And she bears a really strong resemblance to almost every one of Tony Soprano's love interests. From the Mercedes sales girl to the real estate girl, to everything, you know, to every woman that Tony Soprano has ever been attracted to. And this is Chris Montesante's fresh widow. So
yeah, it's the very Jersey girl look, very was it J Wow?
JWoww, absolutely.
J Wow, yes,
Absolutely.
yes,
But
yeah.
Tony Soprano definitely has a type. And even Dr. Melfi is a Tony Soprano type in that, she's always wearing skirts, she's always wearing heels, she's always got her hair done. Tony likes very polished, very put together and well-groomed Italian women. There's no doubt about it.
At that.
Brunette Italian women, absolutely. Absolutely. Which is funny because Carmela is blonde. But but the other references to motherhood, the more subtle ones, in one of Tony's sessions while he's in the coma, he actually says to Dr. Melfi that your mom's a bus and that, she's not the destination. You're supposed to be on there for a little while and then get off, and then the bus goes on its way. And it comes off as kind of a throwaway epiphany. As a matter of fact, Dr. Melfi even says that's very insightful. And then we have multiple references to the bus later on. We have AJ Soprano's big yellow SUV that's very bus-like, which catches fire. And after it catches fire, AJ is very relieved. He's happy about it. When AJ's asked about getting the job, he says he's got to go out and get a bus schedule. He also actually makes a reference about, how he doesn't want to drive, our dependence on foreign oil, and how he should actually start riding the bus. So those are all references to motherhood. They're thinly veiled, but they're most definitely there. And again, that blueprint has already been established that we have all this going on and then all this going on as well. So motherhood, which has been a theme throughout the entire show, Tony's relationship with his mother has been basically put on blast all through these last 3 episodes. The other one, and here's one that I take a lot of fun with. There are so many scenes where everybody is sitting around smoking cigars, so you can see their breath. And there is a scene where they're in a completely cold warehouse, and again, you can see everybody's breath. There's more to this. This is Tony being on a ventilator.
Okay.
So
assisted breathing.
Well, breath is suddenly important. And here's the other thing. I mean, it's when he goes and he meets with Phil, every member of the New York crew is smoking a cigar. Not 1 or 2, all of them. And then later on at Bobby's funeral, when they're done eating, everyone is smoking cigars again. It's a ventilator. It's very obviously like Tony knows subconsciously there's something going on with his breathing, his breath, because breath is very important. I'm going to come back and put this all together, but I just want to cover these big things. Another big theme is AJ, his real son, and Chris Montalsante, his fake son. It's funny how AJ's character goes from being this completely depressed kid, very reminiscent of Tony Soprano himself, and that's ultimately the fear, is that AJ is going to wind up being like Tony. He's going to be depressed and miserable, and he's not going to be able to explain it, and it's just going to get worse and worse, and everything's going to eat at him and gnaw away at him, and he's not going to be able to appreciate beautiful women like his model girlfriend, who they're just friends, all that stuff. And how do they snap AJ out of that? Oh, well, they get him a job following what Chris wanted to do. They get him a job working for the movies, being a movie assistant, and all of a sudden he's happy, and and it's wish fulfillment for Tony. It is most definitely AJ is going on to do what he had wished Chris had done and not gotten involved in the life. So because hang
on right there, because he actually discouraged Chris from doing the movie stuff.
Yes, he did. Yeah, as a matter of fact, several times he told him, you haven't been paying attention on business, and it's suffering because you've got all this going on with your movie out there. Yeah. And not only that, he also resented the hell out of him because the mob boss, played by Daniel Baldwin, was literally Tony Soprano-esque. It was a very thinly veiled Tony Soprano.
Very on the nose and the face, yeah.
So yeah, so that again, subconsciously, that's Tony Soprano thinking about, this is how Chris saw me, this is how I want my son to be. Chris and AJ kind of merging into a single character, because not only does AJ have the flirting with depression, but he also has the flirting with the violence and getting his friends together, and all of them they beat up the Somali kid on the bike, and they pour acid on that kid. And these are all the horrible things that Tony Soprano has killed people, and it's haunted him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want that.
And AJ's already having panic attacks and stuff like that too.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes. And so, there's that. You have Meadow, and Meadow has, like, she's going to school, she's going to be a doctor, and then all of a sudden, no, she's going to be a lawyer, and and by the way, she's getting married, and she's marrying the son of somebody else that's in the family. These are all things that I think Tony wished would happen, because she's no longer going to be he wanted her to be a doctor. She decided to be a lawyer. And then there's this throwaway line buried in this conversation about how she's going to investigate white collar crime. And, oh yeah, there's this case that's involving the city councilman that was selling favors. Well, this would literally be Meadow discovering that Tony Soprano was at the end of that. That's what he doesn't want. He doesn't want Meadow to discover that he's a complete crooked piece of shit, and all this white collar crime, that's exactly what Tony is involved in. That's his greatest fear come to life. And yet at the same time, Meadow's whole story, from being this very involved student and very serious about her education and going to Columbia and being a doctor, all that is getting thrown away. And rather than being a lawyer, she's getting married and she's going to have kids. That's what Tony wishes would happen, that she would just be a good little Italian girl, because all these headaches that he's had to deal with of colleges and this and that all goes away. He doesn't have to deal with that.
Yeah, and it changes like that, just like AJ's storyline just changes like that.
Within the same episode, it goes from her not being a doctor to her getting married. And it's like, what about law school? What about graduating college? What about all that? So it's very weird. It's all super truncated, and these are all the clues that I'm looking at going, that's not right. And this is a show that prided itself on its realism and getting these kinds of details right. But here's, there's a bunch of weird stuff that starts happening after this. And there's I'm going to break away from the themes. We'll come back to how it all kind of ties together. But after the hospital, there's the weird thing with Chris's body being right down the hall and very clearly in Tony's view. But then they go to Chris's widow's family's house, and they're watching a basketball game. And they're more concerned about how poorly Syracuse is playing than the fact that Chris Montesante just died. Mm-hmm. This is the big family tragedy, and I haven't seen this little regard for somebody dying since Tony Soprano's mom died. And they sat around and talked about what a horrible person that she was. Chris Montesante gets absolutely zero regard from his death. And then the really weird factor starts to amp up. They go to the funeral. Tony refuses to go up and see the body. He's sitting back. Carmela goes up, and they show Chris's face, and it's the neutral facial pose. And there's a very clear shot down at Chris in the funeral. And then his wife comes in, and she's dressed like Jackie Kennedy, and she's got the glasses, and she's got the little black dress, and her family is behind her, following her very much like an entourage. And she walks up, and she starts bawling. And for just a second, it looks like Chris is smiling in the casket. If I'm just seeing things, I'm crazy. But I have gone back and rewatched that very short blink and you miss it shot over and over again. And it looks like he's smiling in that casket. And that's, again, a Tony Soprano mind thing. That, yeah, if Chris was here, he'd be smiling about seeing all this. Yeah. Then we immediately go to Paulie's mom's funeral. And no one's there. Tony and Carmela decide to leave Chris's funeral and go see that one, and literally it's completely empty. Going back to the theme of motherhood, this is the woman that raised Paulie, but it turned out it wasn't actually Paulie's mom. She gets no respect. It's right there. I mean, they couldn't make that metaphor any more clear. Then nobody really cared about this woman. She wasn't really Paulie's mom. So, you got that going on.
From there, I didn't really put that one together either until you just mentioned it. Yeah, but that's a good one. Go ahead.
Well, then we get into like things that happen that have never happened on the show before. Tony wakes up after the car accident. He's still got the hospital bracelet on.
Yeah.
That's a sign of weakness to him. he would never have left that bracelet on, number one. And he's laying in bed and it's on his wrist plain as day. Number two, the mobsters from his crew come into his bedroom. That has never happened. They have never gone upstairs. Every time it's either been in the backyard where they're having a big family get together, or it has been downstairs at the kitchen counter. Every time. Without, I can't think of an exception to that. I've never seen any of the gangsters actually go up into Tony's private sleeping area.
No.
So you got that. The other one is there's a family dinner that happens with Chris's widow, and they're sitting at the kitchenette eating. They never sit at the kitchenette and eat. Every time that they've ever shown family dinner, it is always in the front room, the dining room, by the front door. It's gone this way for 6 seasons. Doesn't matter who's there. Doesn't matter if it's Tony Soprano's mother, who he can't stand, or Uncle June, who he thinks is trying to kill him, or Chris, who's just gotten out of rehab and is being a complete weirdo and is going to wind up killing Adrian. Doesn't matter who. Doesn't matter the circumstance. Doesn't matter the what. And yet, for the first time ever, we see them having family dinner at the kitchenette dining space.
Sunday dinners, which was the big thing for them, Sunday dinners were always at the dining room.
Absolutely.
At the big table. Yes.
You get that big bit of weirdness. The other thing is, and I'm jumping around a little bit. This is not going to be in chronological order to how it happens on the show. I'm just going by the order of this is the weird stuff that we were seeing. Tony goes to Las Vegas and he meets with the last prostitute that Chris was with while he was shooting the film. And again, she's beautiful. She's Italian. They get high and they drop peyote. And we see something that we saw in Tony's previous coma. Every time that he sees a white blinking light, he sees one in the bathroom. He sees one when they go out to the sunshine. They showed this when he was in the previous coma, and it was generally when a doctor was checking to see if there was a pupil reflex. And it's the exact same kind of setups. It's always a very bright light and then a very quick glimmer, and then, cut back to whatever the action is at that time. So there's your proof that he's definitely in a coma again. It's right there. It's exactly done the same way. It's not just all the weird subconscious stuff. There's the little indicators. In the first coma, it was a helicopter that was shining down on him while he was standing in a parking lot. There's just, again, the similarities. There's too many of them for it to be coincidence on this one. He has sex with the girlfriend. They go to the slot machines, or they go down to the casino. And when they go down to the casino, there's twinkling lights everywhere. And they make a show of the twinkling lights. Not people, the lights. And then there's this very quick shot on one of the roulette, or on one of the slot machines, of a devil's face. And again, they hold on it for several seconds. There's nothing else in the shot. They didn't walk by it. It's literally just Tony noticed it. They go to the roulette wheel, and he places a bet on 24, and they win. And then he places it on 20, and they win. And then he places it on 24 again, and they win. And Tony starts laughing and collapses to the ground and goes, he's dead. So, it's kind of funny, and that immediately precedes him driving out into the desert. And the other thing is, by the way, his trip to Las Vegas, oh, wait, would that be a departure? Why, yes, it would. But more weird stuff. After we have Bobby, New York decides that they're going to kill the 3 heads of the Soprano crew. And Bobby is in a train store buying a super rare $8,000 train set when 2 hitmen come in and shoot him.
Never happened in the show before. Never has ever been shot and open in the public.
Well, you know what? Not only that, it's always been very... But here's the other... How would they know that he was going to be at the train shop? I mean, if they were following him, you could say, oh, they just followed him. And rather than whack him when he's coming out of the store, they go into the store and shoot him up, which that strikes me as very odd. But more importantly, if Tony Soprano was going to envision Bobby being shot, that's exactly how it would have happened. He was been there and he went to that fucking train store and he's probably buying some stupid train and the two guys found him and they shot him and I hope he landed on the train. And that's exactly what happened. He fell and he landed on the train and knocked it out because Tony was very upset that this mobster had this very elaborate train set up in his garage. He wasn't hurting anybody. It was just hot. And then immediately we go from Bobby getting clipped to Sil, who's at the strip club and he's getting the pay vouchers for the dancers and he's packing up and he's going out. And while he's on his way to the car, he gets shot up pretty, significantly.
Also in public in broad daylight too, which again never happened up until Bobby getting whacked.
Yeah, and so much so that like literally when the hitmen are pulling out, there's this motorcycle accident right after it of this guy in a very yellow, how on earth is not every cop and every ambulance and how do you not just wind up with a slew of it? The whole point of killing somebody is A, to send a message, but B, to make sure that you're only hitting the person that you intend to not draw unwanted attention from the FBI, from the police department. And here they are 2 times, one in a train store and one right outside of the Bing, where like literally every dancer and several patrons are watching it happen. Perfect. Anyway, so Bobby's been shot, Sil has been shot. I think that actually did happen in the real world because going back to that first coma, Tony would overhear stuff that was being talked about in his hospital room, and he would incorporate that into what was going on in his head. No different here. I think that that's exactly what happened. I think that they both were shot by New York. I think that Tony incorporated the way that he thought that it happened into his vision. But then here's where we get back to the weird factor again.
Okay, so just kind of step back real quick then.
Okay.
So Bobby did die, but he just didn't die in the train store.
No.
That was all part of Tony's vision or coma state.
Again, everything that you're seeing is from Tony's point of view, and it's how Tony would imagine that it happened.
Okay.
And that's the point. There's another couple of examples of that. When Dr. Melfi goes and has dinner with all the other psychiatrists, and they talk about how treating sociopaths, is ultimately a criminal enterprise and it just helps them become better criminals. They're not talking like a bunch of educated people. They're talking how Tony would imagine a bunch of psychiatrists talking. If you really look at the dialogue of that scene and the way that they're talking to each other, there's no professionalism there, and they don't sound like a bunch of educated people. They sound like a bunch of gangsters. And that's exactly how Tony would envision them speaking as educated. I mean, this is the same guy that, would constantly use the wrong word, but it sounds close to the word that he meant to say. So, Bobby's been shot, Sil's been shot, and they decide to go on the lam. And they get in their cars, and the rest of what's left of the Soprano crew go to a house. And they walk into what appears to be a completely abandoned house. And they sit down, and behind the gangsters is a cardboard cutout of Sil. Sil is not in real estate, but there he is, big as life. You can't miss it. And it's one of those, it's so buried in the background and there's so much tension going on that it'd be easy to overlook. But I'm not making this one up. It's there. I've rewatched that episode 3 times. I can point to it for you.
Are you sure it wasn't, oh God. Who's the guy that got killed that got outed as gay?
Vito. No.
Vito. You sure it wasn't Vito? Because he was.
Absolutely.
They did take pictures of him. He was kind of a spokesperson for that diet plan that he was on.
Yes, he was. But Sil has a very distinct way of dressing. He has a very distinct hairline, and he always had a little pocket square, and you can clearly see that it's Sil in that. When you insert the screen grab here, trust me, there's not going to be any doubt. You'll be able to cut out all of that exposition that we just had and just go, yeah, that's Sil right there. So you have that, and then Tony takes the cover off of what he was carrying. You realize that it's the gun that Bobby gave him as a gift. And then they have that flashback to, you probably don't even hear the shot coming. When has The Sopranos ever done a flashback like that? From a structural standpoint, I can't think of a single instance of them reminding you of a conversation that happened earlier. They just go ahead. And then he goes upstairs and he lays down on the bed in his black leather jacket with the gun across his arm, and that's where the episode ends. He wakes up and he's completely different clothes. And the other thing is, in the first coma, every time that it would start, it would be a shot of Tony sleeping in bed. Same thing here. Very first shot is a straight shot down, Tony Soprano, laying in bed facing up in a bathrobe. He's on the lam with a gun, and it's a bathrobe. Again, I may be reading too much into that. It may be that it's supposed to indicate that several days have passed and Tony's relaxed a little bit. But he goes downstairs, and there's this new cat. Speaking of, and here's another one of those, you're going to need to cut this bit and put it in front of my Junior Soprano one. Let's deal with the cat in the room. Everybody said the cat is a metaphor for Adriana. No. A slang term for a cat is a what?
It's a pussy.
Yes. And that cat is Pussy Bumpin' Sorrow. That cat was Tony's friend who he killed in the early seasons. And that cat is staring at the photo of Chris Montalsante, who Tony also killed. And these were two guys that Tony Soprano was supposed to be really close with, and he has their blood on his hands. He killed them both. That cat, anybody who thinks that that cat is anything other than Tony's guilt over killing Pussy Bumpin' Sorrow and Chris Montalsante really need to go back and rewatch these last couple episodes. It is plain as day, because Paulie, who was also involved in the killing of Pussy, he hates the cat at first.
He freaked the fuck out about the cat. He wanted to try to get rid of the cat so fucking bad.
He
so
does.
bad.
He even talks about killing the cat several times. And then finally, when Tony makes him an offer of taking over the captain's slot and taking over his own crew of guys, he suddenly makes peace with the cat. And the weird thing about it is that the crew that Tony's talking to him about is the crew that Pussy used to run. So, it's all over it. It's blatant. It's just in your face. And anybody who thinks that cat is representative of anything else, I got nothing for you. If that one doesn't seal the deal for you on this one.
Well, another thing that would support that theory too is anytime during that season where Adriana was brought back up was always with Carmela. Carmela was the one that always flashed back to Adriana. There were several scenes where you find Carmela talking to somebody, and then you look and he sees Adriana, and then after you see Adriana, she would just disappear.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I don't think Tony gave really two fucks about Adriana that much, and
I don't think he did either, because at the end of the day, she was a snitch. She was trying to turn Chris against the family, and and she was a problem that needed to be taken care of. He doesn't feel any guilt over that.
No, absolutely not. No. And it's been established multiple times the guilt he feels over killing Pussy.
Yes.
Prior.
Absolutely has. I'm trying to remember the exact order of stuff that happened. He goes and he visits his family at the beach house where they're staying at, because they're staying in a separate thing. And again, they drive there in the Steinholtz beverage van. There's your, another asbestos reference again. And when they go to the beach house, it's not this beautiful beach house like the one that Tony had bought earlier. He spent several, I think right at like a 1.1 million or something like that to purchase that first house that he wasn't giving up because he wanted to sleep with the realtor. But this is a dump. It's this little shanty shack, and no one is panicked. No one is worried. AJ's girlfriend is going out the front door, and Tony's making a comment of she should be going out the back, and Meadow is going back to the city.
Yeah, everything was very nonchalant. Yeah.
No one seems to care that the New York crew just killed Bobby and just killed, shot Syl. They're just going on about their business. And again, it's very weird. And then he reminds them, oh, yeah, we're all going to Bobby's funeral. And, when they ask why, oh, well, the FBI is always there. They wouldn't dare try anything. We don't actually get to see the funeral at all. As a matter of fact, the only bit of the funeral we see is from a monitor in the FBI office, a video that they shot of the funeral.
Huh.
This is Bobby's funeral.
It's very
weird.
Yeah, because every funeral is a big deal. They wouldn't just gloss over a funeral.
And funerals are also places where families get together and make peace. They end wars. They come to an understanding, something like that. Not here, not in this particular instance. So Bobby's funeral happens. And again, Tony didn't get to go to the funeral. He didn't get to talk to anybody. Why? He's in a coma. Of course he doesn't know what happens. He knows that, what that funeral probably looked like. He knows that the FBI was probably there, but that's all that he knows. Here's the kicker. Here's where we get into it really getting odd. We immediately go to Vesuvio's, the restaurant that has been in the series from the beginning. At no point do we see, is Arthur's the chef's name?
Artie, Arthur.
Yeah.
Artie.
We don't see Arthur. We don't see his wife at all, number one. Number two, it's a buffet.
Yeah, no. It's not a buffet.
No. And again, the weird factors keep piling up. It's a buffet, and it's a very crowded, disorganized buffet, like people scooping mustacholi and all this. So
no, that wouldn't have happened. No, Artie would have been out there full force with his wife, and everything would have been just fucking so. Because Artie was an anal motherfucker. He took pride in his fucking shit. And there would have been Muscatoli.
Tony Soprano's brother-in-law died, and this is how they're doing his funeral. No. So then we get this very odd cut. Carmela is sitting down. Tony is standing up. They're not at a table. They're standing in front of the painting on the wall of Vesuvius erupting. No one is around them. That speaks volumes in and of itself. Tony's not sitting with his family. He's not sitting at a table at Vesuvio's. It's not fine dining. We have never seen Tony and Carmela go anywhere pedestrian. It has always been a very high-dollar sushi place or Vesuvio's or the one restaurant that popped up that was competition for Vesuvius early on. And here we are, Bobby's funeral. Nobody is expressing condolences. And I don't think Janice is actually even shown, or Bobby's kids, during that whole sequence. And so the next shot, right after that, is all the youngsters. It's AJ, it's Meadow, it's a bunch of the younger kids are sitting at a table, and they're all smoking cigars. Again, because breathing is important. And remember, the breathing is the respirator. So we have that. And then after that whole weird scene where they reference this poem by Yeats and the Middle East and all this weird stuff, AJ's still deep in his depression, and AJ has this line where he says, "You're living in a dream."
I remember the line.
And it's just right there. So we go from there. Phil is conspiring, and the New York crew guys think that Phil might be thinking about whacking them. Mm-hmm. That's the buildup to all of this. There's a very odd phone call that's placed, and Phil won't tell anybody where he's at because he's on the lam as well. So you have all that going on, and Tony makes the gesture of reaching out to the second in command of the New York crew, and they're going to get together and they're going to have a sit down. And this is another one of those very surreal scenes. It's all black. The door opens, a van comes in, and there's snow outside. Oh, there's the asbestos again. And they get out, and everybody surrenders their guns, and they go into this really crappy warehouse, and there is this table that is set up in the middle, and there is the Soprano crew on one side, and there is the New York crew on the other side. And it's very obviously stated, hey, anybody want a water? They have this strange table set up with rows of bottles of water there.
Huh. I don't think I ever
And
noticed that.
I think that's them taking Tony off of saline. They're taking him. They're stopping fluids. Is really what it boils down to. This is what's been keeping Tony alive while he's been unconscious all this time, and he's aware of it. So you have that. You have everybody. No one. Somebody is smoking at the table, but it's very cold, so you can see everybody's breath, and there's white particles floating everywhere. So again, we're back to the breathing, and we are back to the asbestos again. And they come to the agreement that New York is not going to whack Phil, but they're okay if New Jersey, if the Soprano family decides to take care of it how they feel they need to take care of it. So an agreement is made, and that's what's going to keep the peace on this one. And there's this odd scene where they're talking about Bobby getting whacked, and there's this very loud train sound effect that's building up and building up and building up, and then they change the topic to, well, Janice is a widow now. Janice has got to see something. And the sound effect of the train that's just been getting so loud for several seconds immediately stops.
My price is you help us get a location on Phil.
I can't go there. Well, you do what you gotta do.
One more thing. You hit my brother-in-law.
So?
This is my sister we're talking about.
And that makes sense, now you say, because they're talking about Bobby, and again, the reference to the trains, his trains.
Exactly. And the minute that the topic changes to Janice,
Stop.
no more trains. It's no longer about Bobby. It's about Janice, and it's no longer about the stupid trains that drives Tony nuts. It's about Janice. So they come to an understanding. They don't actually settle on a number, but they agree that Janice is going to get paid something. And they leave it in the air like that. So we go through all of that. And then Tony has his crew trying to figure out where Phil is. And he's been calling for payphones. And he reaches out to his friend, the FBI guy. Which, again, stuff we've never seen before. We have never seen the FBI guy reference Tony in anything other than a professional. Even when Tony had given them information that was actionable, that they were able to act on, when it came to the Middle Eastern guys that were hanging out at the Bing, and Tony, identified them, and he was giving them all this stuff. Suddenly they're having conversations about family and friends and about seeing your kids and all this. That would never happen. It was always...
it would never be chummy or an act is like in a informant type of...
Absolutely.
In that capacity.
Yeah. More importantly than that, there is a very brief scene where the FBI agent calls Tony and he's like, yeah, they were all traced back to this phone in Oyster Bay. And he hangs up the phone. So he's leaking information. All right, even if you buy the credibility of that one, then immediately this good-looking FBI woman comes out of the bathroom, putting on a shirt and putting her holster back on. Here's a guy that was just complaining to Tony Soprano about seeing his wife and kids, and it turns out that he's actually sleeping with this good-looking female FBI agent, even though we've all seen his partner, and that's not his partner.
Does she look like the Jersey stereotype?
As a matter of fact, she does, with a bob. And it also lets Tony think, this guy's a guy that's just like me. Yeah, sure, he loves his wife and his family, but he's got a little something going on the side. It's probably another one of him because they get each other. We would never let a woman into our thing, but, the FBI, they got to let a woman in. And, hey, why not bang her? That's exactly how Tony would think about the whole process on that one. But more on that one to come. So then we get to Phil being found by Tony's crew. He's at a gas station. He's in an SUV. He's got his wife. He's got his 2 grandchildren in the back seat. And out of nowhere, one of Tony's crew comes up behind Phil and shoots him in the back of the head and then empties a couple more into him for good measure. But that's not good enough. Then the wife gets locked out of the SUV, and the SUV is rolling forward, and it rolls over Phil Leotardo's head, causing the people that are standing around, again, in broad daylight, that saw everything happen, throw up, What does this sound like? This sounds like Anthony Soprano explaining how he hopes Phil Leotardo died. You know, I hope he was there and in his gas station in his stupid jumpsuit. Which I don't think we ever saw Phil Leotardo in a tracksuit. I could be wrong on that one. But he's there. He's got his bitch wife nagging at him. And he gets shot and he gets clipped. And I hope that fucking SUV rolled over his head with his grandkids in the back seat. You can hear Tony Soprano explain it like that. And that's exactly how it happened. And again, everything about that scene, it's so weird. Phil is not acting like Phil. Phil has always just been this dry, old school, this is how you're supposed to be when you're a gangster. And all of a sudden he's, hey, say bye-bye to Grandpa. No. But then we cut back to the FBI guy and his FBI, friend of Tony's. And he's in the office and he gets the phone call. And he literally goes, yes, we won.
Never would happen. Why would he give a fuck?
Exactly. Not only why would he give a fuck, but it's showing again that, Tony sees him as a friend. He sees him as someone that's on his side. This is what's going on in Tony's head. So Phil gets whacked. And Tony decides he's going to go see Uncle June. And, they have an excuse that, Uncle June's friend came to see him and Janice is trying to take his money and blah, blah, blah. First off, why would Tony care about Uncle June's money? Second off, Uncle June was supposedly broke, if I'm not mistaken, and that's why he wound up in a state home. Yeah. So I don't know how much of that makes sense. That could be intentional. I don't care. That's not the important part. The important part is that Tony goes to see Uncle June, and Uncle June has no idea who he is. He has no recollection of him at all. And Tony even goes so far as to say, hey, you used to run New Jersey. And Uncle June's response is, oh, well, that's nice. This is letting Tony know subconsciously that you might be a big man right now, that everybody might know who Tony Soprano is while you're alive. But the minute you're dead and gone, no one is going to remember it. And if you live long enough, you're not even going to remember it, just like Uncle June. So, I mean, the metaphor on that one, that's very much in your face. Tony Soprano would like to think that what he is doing matters, and it doesn't. And he's coming. And that's the scene right before the very last scene in the show. And, we're going to Holstein's. When have we ever seen Tony eat at a diner? No. I can't recall any time that Tony's ever gone out for dinner and it has not been Vesuvio's or the sushi place. I could be mistaken. I could be not, losing one in the background there. But
it was when they did, it was very rare, and I think it was less than a handful of times if it ever did happen. Usually if it did, it's because they were out of town already.
And I was going to say, the only time I can think of that it might have happened is when they were going up to tour colleges with Meadow. Mm-hmm. But that's the only occasion that I can think of. But back on point. Everybody has watched the restaurant scene over and over and over again, so I don't need to recap what's going on. I'm going to tell you what I think everything in there represents. Holstein's represents Tony's youth. When you see the layout of the restaurant, the music that's on the jukebox is the music that Tony Soprano would listen to. When you see the mural that's on the wall behind him, it's 2 football players and a high school. Tony played football. Mm-hmm. Tony got a knee injury from it. And the other thing is, music has always, for the last couple episodes, music has popped up through these, sometimes at very appropriate times, sometimes at very odd times. And a lot of the music, it's all real songs. The only other time I can remember music being played is when Tony was in that first coma and somebody told him that they should play CDs because the music stimulates his brain, and that music would always carry over into whatever was happening in his dream. And I think it's the exact same thing here, because we have an occasion where Bob Dylan plays and Elvis' Suspicious Minds plays, and The Sopranos has never really been, musically, I don't recall The Sopranos playing that kind of music, in the background. It's always been something that's
specifically composed for the episode.
And if he was listening to popular music, it was always in the Escalade, and 9 times out of 10 was classic rock.
Or it's something where Tony's, playing the Clash on the radio.
Yes.
Or it's, turn on the radio and there's a Journey tune on there. That has happened, yeah, but I don't recall them ever using somebody else's music for background track, except for when Tony was in the first coma. So somebody puts on Don't Stop Believin' on the CD player in Tony's hospital room, and he's sitting in the restaurant that's indicative of his past, and Carmela walks in, and with Carmela walks in the USA truck driver wearing hat who sits down and has a coffee with 3 creamers, not a cappuccino, but that was not so bad. Then AJ comes in, and our man in the mysterious members only jacket walks in. And a lot of people say, well, that's a reference to the members only episode where the mobster got money and he wanted to leave the life. Yeah, remember that. He wanted to leave the life. He wanted to get out from being a gangster. He wanted to take his family and go to Florida. And when he was basically told, no, you can't ever leave the life, he hung himself. This is not a hitman. That whole bit there is a reference to The Godfather, which is one of Tony's favorite movies. Michael Corleone goes into the bathroom where a gun is hidden for him. It's meant for you to get all that. You're supposed to understand that, yes, this is a reference to The Godfather, but at the same time, this is The Sopranos. We don't reference other shows and the realities of what happened. We're showing you the gritty reality of it. And every time that somebody has been whacked on the show, they walk in, they blast, they leave. When Sil was at a restaurant and the guy that he was sitting at the table with got whacked, it happened so fast, you never actually saw the shooters. Why would this shooter, how would he know that they were going to be at Holston's? How would he know to hide a gun in the toilet? And why bother hiding a gun in the toilet? There's no security there. There's no other gangsters there. So that theory falls apart on its surface. But if you think of it as, this is Tony Soprano's mind, this is a reference, this is something that he would think of, then it suddenly all makes sense. There's a scene, there's a shot where 2 African-American gentlemen walk in and they're looking at the pies. That's another reference to hitmen, because the Soprano crew had actually hired African-Americans. They wanted to go outside of their respective family and hire somebody to come in and whack somebody that shouldn't have been whacked, a made guy, a boss, something like that. Well, Tony's a boss. They're just as likely to be shooters as well. But this is the stuff that Tony's afraid of. This is also the way that Tony expected to die. And it's not. So AJ comes in and AJ sits down on the table. Now, interesting thing about the seating arrangement, Meadow hasn't shown up. The only seat that's left at that table is where Meadow would sit. And it would be directly to the right of Tony Soprano. Carmela sat across from Tony, facing the mural with the high school and the football on it. She's literally looking at Tony's past. That's how she sees Tony, is the football player. Her character even makes reference to this, that, back in high school, you were Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky, you didn't have a care in the world, and I've had to deal with your depression and all this bullshit. I don't want to deal with it. That's a strong metaphor right there. It's not spelled out, but it's all over it. AJ comes in, sits down, and he played football just like Tony wanted him to in high school, and now he's kind of directionless. He's kind of more or less, even though there's that wish fulfillment bit with him going to work for Carmine and being an assistant with movie production, he's very much a reflection of Tony Soprano. Again, across from the table, facing backwards at the mural with the high school and the football stuff. It's all very literal. And they're sitting there and the onion rings come. Well, that would be the respirator being pulled out. There's the 3 rings. They each have an onion ring, best in the state. And they make a big thing about showing Tony eat an onion ring and Carmela eat an onion ring and AJ eat an onion ring. That's the respirator coming off. And they're waiting because Tony's waiting for Meadow to show up because Meadow's smart and Meadow solves things and Meadow's going to medical school and Meadow will make it all better. And Meadow somehow can't figure out how to park a car.
God, they stretched that out for almost a minute. Screen time, bouncing back and forth between what's going inside and outside. At least that's what it seemed like, when you watched it the first time.
And here's the funny thing. She's been living in New York, going to school at Columbia in a big city, and suddenly she can't figure out how to park a car in the big city? That makes zero sense. It's showing her to be incompetent. And more importantly, she gets out of the car and she comes running in, and you hear the door, but Meadow never actually walks into the restaurant. That is Tony Soprano dying. That is Tony Soprano dying on the table because the respirator has been removed and he wanted to wait for Meadow to get there and she was on her way and she didn't make it. And that is how The Sopranos actually ended. Everything from the car accident onward is Tony in a coma. The blueprint for this was spelled out in the early episodes. The coincidences, the metaphors, all the subconscious stuff. It's all there, but it's buried deep. And people were so hooked on the idea that this was going to be like the big standoff between New York and New Jersey, and it's got to end in a bloodbath because that's how Goodfellas ended and The Godfather ended, and this is a show about mobsters. Yeah, this is The Sopranos. It's a show about the reality of being a mobster, and you're far more likely to die in a hospital after being shot or in a car accident or left for dead or whatnot. You're far more likely to have your respirator turned off than you are to get lit up in a train store. So, so now that you've heard my theory in full, what are your thoughts?
The only thing I can kind of pick apart, I wouldn't not even necessarily pick apart, but just the fact that if there was any signs or any indication that he may make it, I can't imagine them pulling the plug on him, pulling tube out and all that stuff. So the fact that he's, kind of reacting to the stimulus of the eye, the light and all this stuff, would lead me to believe that they wouldn't necessarily do that. That's the only real hole I can kind of poke into the whole theory. Is just that one little thing. If there's any type of reaction, if there's any type of hope, don't stop believing. You wouldn't pull the plug.
Well, but remember that happens literally like not very long after the car accident, a whole episode before the last episode. So I mean, to me, it actually follows the progression that they got him to. They were crashed on the side of the road in the middle of nothing. So we have no idea how long it would have taken for an ambulance to get there. We have no idea how long that ambulance ride back would have been. We have no idea, what transpired in all that time. To my way of thinking, yeah, he initially showed, pupillary reaction. That's why they put him on a respirator. That's why they put him on, a feeding tube and on fluids. And progressively, as everything deteriorates, he's not responsive to it. So they're going to leave him on, and they're going to hope for the best. And oh, by the way, we're going to play suspicious minds because we have some brain activity going on. But also remember this: that first coma was almost played out exactly the same way. They really did not expect him to come back, and then he had a heart attack. And he had a heart attack because Paulie wouldn't shut the fuck up. And that's what drove him to a heart attack, and then they shocked him back, and that's what came back to it. Now, if you have a traumatic event like that happen, and then less than a year later have it happen again, you're far less likely to recover. And if they treat you, they're going to treat you much more gingerly than they would have for that initial one, because your body's already been through such a massive shock. It's not going to be able to take another one. So to me, it completely makes sense. The timeline makes sense. The reactions, yeah, you're right. There was initially pupillary reactions, but then those stopped because we don't see flashes of light anymore. But then things started getting weird. And then we have the respirator is on, and Tony's aware of the respirator, and then the feeding tube comes out, and then the fluids stop, and then the respirator gets shut off. And even if Tony was there, if he can't breathe on his own, the bell ringing because they shut the respirator off, ding, that's the door when Meadow comes in. Well, except for she didn't make it in time. And then silence and a black background. Why? Because there is no heaven, there is no hell, there's nothing. You're just gone.
I think the machine got unplugged. I think the jukebox got unplugged.
Yeah, all I'm saying is a good surge protector. A good surge protector gonna say Tony Sopranos. So there you go. There is my grand theory of The Sopranos. I really do think that that's the way that. And I'm sure that there's stuff in there, weird stuff that I didn't catch. That if people go back and they watch the show, they're going to pick up even more of this weird stuff, like the cutout of Syl and the cat is a metaphor for pussy and all that. Go back and examine it. Really watch it, because I watched it the first time and the first thing I caught was that smile, and then I went back and watched it and I'm like going, okay, I got to make a note of that, and I got to make a note of that, and I got to make a note of that. And the more I looked at it and really studied it, the weirder it got. And it's not just that last episode; it is all the way up to that car accident. So if you find anything in those last few episodes of The Sopranos that is weird, comment right down there. Just leave it. Just leave it right there. Or you could just tell me that I'm batshit insane and it's time for me to go get put on some better meds, or start wearing a tinfoil hat. I got no shame.
Well, here's the other thing about this. Is like, all that aside, when I first watched The Sopranos, I was a casual watcher. Not even a casual watcher. I seen like episodes here and there, while it was being aired, originally for the first time. And I saw the last episode, and I looked, I was like, what the fuck is this? I was like, this ending is stupid, it's cheap, it seems lazy as fuck, so, and then, all the other theories out there is like, well, he dies. Like, well, that's fucking great, but does that really answer anything? Or does it, is that satisfying to you? Just to be like that simple and ambiguous ending. Like, was he shot? Was he not shot? None of that is really satisfying at all. So even if what you're presenting out there isn't what they intended or whatever, that is a much more satisfying ending to me. Having that explained to me is infinitely more satisfying and doesn't feel like I wasted a couple months catching up just so we could do this fucking episode, And hopefully it gives other people some satisfaction too, something else to fucking chew on. And maybe then they can then enjoy this show, whereas before they're like, the ending was stupid, or dumb, or just as simple as, well, guess what, he got whacked.
I really do think, I think the creator of the show, I think he intended for somebody to figure it out, but it was so far off the beaten path, it got the same kind of reaction that the Matrix trilogy gets, because I watched the Matrix movies and I dearly love them, and I get all the references and I get all the metaphors and I get what they're going for. And you know what? These two opposing forces that have been enemies for generations, they finally get together and they come to an accord and understanding. And so the war stops. But while that was a satisfying ending to me, because historically that tends to happen, everybody else wanted the war to end with a big boom and humanity defeating the machines and big explosions and yay, we won, like the end of Return of the Jedi. And that's exactly what the Wachowskis were never going to do. But to me, it seemed more honest that, man has to live with machine. They covered this thematically, even in the dialogue, that man and machine, you can't separate them. Our whole culture is based on it. We have to live together. And that was the point of the Matrix films. But people poo-pooed all over that, and it really stained the reputation of the Wachowskis and of the Matrix films. And I'm thinking, this strikes me more as that, because the Sopranos was so carefully constructed. It was so carefully scripted and cast. Nothing was ever wasted. So for me to think, nah, they just didn't know what they were doing and they got lazy and they just rushed it and that whole ending. No. and to hear the creator go, no, it's exactly what I intended it to be. There's obviously more there. And that's what got me examining all this and really looking at it and going, okay, I really had no intention of going back and rewatching The Sopranos. I had seen it, but after Game of Thrones shit the bed, I was like, you know what? Game of Thrones was good, but I can at least see like they were going to have problems with that. Sopranos was created to be exactly what it was by a group of people that were intensely passionate about it, not guys that just lucked into the right property. So, I wanted to re-examine it, and this was not a theory that I've got this idea and I'm going to see if it fits. I literally watched the whole series from beginning to end, and I knocked it out in like 3 weeks. And then I was like, hey, wait a minute. I caught that. I started compiling evidence and assembled the theory from what I saw. I did not start with my theory and work backwards. It just so happens that every time that I went back and rewatched those last 4 episodes, I kept finding more and more stuff and more weird stuff. I didn't actually see the cardboard cutout of Syl until I just watched it this last time before we were going to film this particular review. And I stopped it and I was like, how can you argue with what I'm saying now? It's right there. It's so weird. All these bizarre things. So yeah, that's what I got for you. That's it.
Right on. Well, I don't have anything to add. I pretty much said what I wanted to say at the end. That it was a satisfying ending. Now that you explained it to me, so
join us on the next episode of Tony and Mike Watch the World Burn, where Mike tries to convince me that The Lost Boys is a masterpiece, and I very subtly show him that no, it's not. It's a colossal pile of shit.
It is not a masterpiece. It is the perfect gateway into horror.
Next time, Tony and Mike Watch the World Burn. Peace!
See you guys next time.
Sail on through the night, Lost Boys.
What?
The Lost Boys theme song, Sail On Through the Night.
I do not recall this at all.
Oh, when you watch the movie, you'll remember it.
Okay.
Trust me. You're going to hear, oh my God, not only did he do that, but he did it well. So.